Hi everyone, welcome to another video, and today we're going to be focusing on the topic of development, which is 3.1 in economic development. So what you need to know about development are the indicators of development, and there's a variety, and we're going to go through them one by one. So the first is GNP per capita, and by the way, GNP stands for gross national product, and per capita means per person. So the GNP per capita can be used to compare developments in different countries, well, obviously because of their wealth. So if countries have a higher GNP per capita, that means it's more human development, and therefore they are able to access medicine, food, water, etc. But one limitation of using GNP per capita is that it does not take into account the cost of living in the country. So in some countries it may be more expensive to live, so therefore a given amount of money might be worth less, but in one country the same amount of money might be worth more. The next is literacy rate. So literacy rate suggests a skillful workforce and also economic growth. This is because more people are being educated, and therefore people will be more employable and so can get more jobs. And it also suggests an technologically advanced society. And this is because when there's economic growth, there will be more demand for technological resources like computers, laptops, devices, etc. And therefore the country will be more technologically advanced. And also it will show that there is more gender equality because education received is equal. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be looking at is life expectancy, and this shows high R&D. So this means high R&D stands for research and development, and this could be due to the availability of the quaternary sector, and we're going to go into this in more detail, but just for now, quaternary sector is the sector in which people are employed in science related fields and also conduct research. So therefore, if more people are employed here, there'll be a higher R&D. It also shows that they have access to healthcare, food, and water. Okay, and finally we're going to be looking at the Human Development Index, which I'm going to be referring to as HDI. So the 4 indicators of the HDI that you need to know are life expectancy at birth, mean years of schooling, 8 for adults age 25, and the expected years of schooling for children and finally the GNI per capita. And by the way, GNI stands for gross national income per person. Okay, so basically the HDI is scored on from 0 to 1, so it will be some decimal place between that. So a high HDI represents high development and a low HDI represents low development. And sometimes they may ask you to calculate the HDI based on the data given, and then you have to compare the different HDI values to determine the difference in development between different countries. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at inequalities in development. And you need to know reasons for inequalities in development within countries and between countries as well. So for within countries, some reasons include the variability of areas with water access, and also variability of areas with access to energy sources, and there's also variation in access to roads and railway, and variation in access to fertile soil, and finally there's variation in the level of development. So by this I mean those the proportion of those employed at different sectors of the economy. So now we're going to be looking at the reasons for inequality between countries. Okay. So the first reason is that is colonization. So some countries may have previously been colonized, so this can lead to a lack of resources. Next is accessibility to raw materials, and for example this can be used for manufacturing. The next is civil unrest, because if there is more civil unrest happening in a country, then there may be decrease in development because infrastructure and critical capital equipment might be destroyed, so therefore development might be slowed in a country. The next is high levels of corruption, and this can lead to a lack of economic development because there may be a lack of political stability. And finally, there may be countries that are landlocked. So this means they have limited access to water and transport, or you could also say trade as well. Okay, so now we've looked at the reasons for inequalities within and between countries, and now we're going to be looking at the economic sectors and what they are. So there's 4 types. There's primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. So primary is responsible for the extraction of raw materials, and this can be in the form of mining, fishing. So these are examples of jobs that people would do in those industries, in the primary industries. And secondary is responsible for the processing of raw materials into goods. So for example, this can be car manufacturing, sewing, and producing steel. Next is tertiary. So this is responsible for the provision of a service. So some examples may include teachers, retail workers, and doctors. And finally, the quaternary sector is responsible for R&D. So such jobs include scientists and researchers. Okay, so those are the 4 economic sectors you need to know. And now you need to know the change in the trends of the economic sectors as a country develops. So what happens is that in the pre-industrial period, as you can see, primary sector is the highest, while the secondary and tertiary sectors are lower. And as you can see, as a country develops, the primary sector has a reduced percentage, and as a result, agriculture declines because it's the primary job that is carried out in the primary sector. And therefore, the secondary sector, as you can see in the pre-industrial period, starts to increase. So increase in secondary sector, and therefore so this will lead to factories being built. However, over time, manufacturing decreases in importance, and therefore the tertiary sector, as you can see, has an increased percentage in the industrial period. So because there is a growth of services and commerce, so this will cause this tertiary sector to grow. And as the tertiary sector grows, the quaternary sector will also increase. So it will increase because there is more demand for innovation and research. So yeah, that's all you need to know for the trends for the economic sector. So I would just um, remember the reasons or why the trends are the way they are, and then you should be able to answer the exam question. So the next we're going to be looking at is globalization. And basically what this is the increasing interconnectedness of the world. And there are many reasons as to why globalization is increasing. So the first reason is that there's low labor costs and less emission regulations. So companies will be able to afford more factories and can emit more to produce goods, and also can employ cheap labor, so that there's a higher workforce to produce more goods and can therefore increase the income for them. The next reason is there is increased freedom of trade in modern society. And this is because the freedom of trade increased as a result of countries beginning to open up their borders post World War II, and therefore there was more international trade, and therefore it can lead to globalization as companies might invest in other countries. The next is increased containerization. And transporting of goods. And basically what containerization is that there is an increase in container ships. So those ships that have large containers which are stored with goods and are transported from one country to another by ships. So that is what containerization is. And there's also been improvements in internet and mobile communication. And yeah, those are the reasons why there's globalization. So now we're going to be looking at transnational corporations and their role in globalization. And if you don't know what transnational corporations are, is that they are large companies that have factories or retail shops located overseas. So a good example of TNC is McDonald's, because they originally started in the USA, but however over time it's spread to like most countries in the world. So we're going to be looking at transnational corporations and their role in globalization. So transnational corporations are involved in all the economic sectors, so primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. They operate in foreign countries, as I said in the definition. And it also promotes cultural exchange by introducing values into another country. And you also need to know the role of technology in globalization. So technology has led to improvement in transport, and it also has led to quicker and cheaper air travels due to the development of budget airlines. It also led to the development of containerization as well as communication systems and networks. And it also increased e-commerce as well as the digital transfer of money. And now we're going to be looking at the impacts of globalization at a local, national, and international scale. So at a local scale, there's a greater choice of goods. There is also an integration of cultures. So this can lead to more cultural exchange. It can also lead to technological advancement and innovation. It also leads to the exploitation of workers. And finally, it can also lead to local businesses unable to compete with TNCs. So as you can see, they're both positive and negative impacts that globalization can have on a local scale. And these positive and negative impacts also apply to impacts at a national and international scale, which we'll go more into depth now. So at a national scale, there are high levels of education and senior leadership. There is also the growth of infrastructure and public services. So public services include healthcare and education. However, there's some negative effects of globalization at a national scale. So this could create wealth disparities. It can also have a negative environmental impact, and this is because of the burning of fossil fuels, which releases greenhouse gases. Okay, and finally, the last impact it has is that there's a pressure on housing near factories, and this is because due to the higher proportion of the population working in secondary sectors, they would need to have homes to live in near their workplaces, which are factories, and therefore there's pressure on the housing located near these factories. And finally, we're going to be looking at impacts at a global scale. So a positive impact is that it has an increase in international trade. It can also lead to an increase in wealth, and therefore an increase in the increase in quality of life. It can also lead to increased migration, and this might be negative because there'll be uneven population distribution, and it also leads to a loss in biodiversity because land is cleared for factories, and and also culture identities might be eroded. And this is because some places may become westernized. So yeah. And now we're going to be looking at the case studies that you need to know for this topic, and you only need to know one case study, which is an example of a TNC. So for this case study, you need to know 3 benefits of the TNC overseas and 3 costs of the TNC overseas. And again, you need to know 3 benefits at the origin of the country of origin of the TNC and 3 costs of the TNC in the country of origin. Anyways, that's it for today's video. I hope you found this video useful, and see you next time. Bye.